Good morning and good afternoon. My name is John. Two world-class personalities. We have a former president of Georgia, Mikheil Saakashvili, who's now taken on a critical new post on dealing with reform in Ukraine. We have Stephen Sackur, the host of HARDtalk and a world-renowned media personality. Steve, I'll turn this over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, John, and good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to be able to join this conversation with Mikheil Saakashvili, who I'm sure to many of you watching does not need a very formal introduction. As John said, he was a two-term president of Georgia. He has had, let us say, a colorful career since then, which involved a certain amount of legal difficulty, involved a commitment to work in Ukraine when he took over the governorship of Odesa region in Ukraine in the period from 2015 to 16. That did not go smoothly, I think it's fair to say. Mr. Saakashvili was forced to leave, spend some time overseas, not in Ukraine or in Georgia for various reasons. But he is back. And he is back with a new job, and we want to talk to him about exactly what this job entails. The title is Executive Secretary of Ukraine's National Reform Council. He has been appointed by President Zelensky to oversee the reform necessary to turn Ukraine into a fully functioning modern European state. Can it be done? Well, I'm delighted to say he's with me now. Mikheil Saakashvili, a very warm welcome to this conversation.
Wonderful opportunity to talk to basically the best think tank out there that exists on Ukraine and on our region. And I will be more than delighted to have this interaction and to ask all the questions.
Great. Well, listen, it's great to see you. We have had several sessions of sparring on the HARDtalk show at the BBC over the years. I'm not wearing my HARDtalk hat today, but nonetheless, some of my questions are going to be pretty challenging. So let's get right onto it. This job of yours, Executive Secretary of the National Reform Council, it's an interesting title, but what does it really mean? What are your areas of responsibility? And what authority do you really have?
Well, to be more precise, it's called the Chairman of Executive Council of National Reform Council and the Executive Committee of National Reform Council. You see, it's so complicated, I cannot even remember the name exactly for the last month or so, 3 weeks actually, that I've been in office. But the idea is that this is the body that encompasses all the branches of power. So once a month, they gather under the chairmanship of president. It includes all the members of the government, the heads of parliamentary factions. It includes the head of chairman of the National Bank and the main business associations. There are about 50 of them in Ukraine, but like the main one representing small business, medium business, foreign businesses here, like American Chamber of Commerce, the European Business Association. And the idea is to jumpstart or restart or speed up the reform process. I mean, Zelensky, I think, felt the need to recreate this council because it existed the first years of Poroshenko, and back then it was pretty efficient. Then Poroshenko lost appetite for the reforms and basically kind of cooled towards the council. But now Zelensky felt that he needed something else to jumpstart reform, especially with all the feelings that some of the things got stuck, with all the criticisms Ukraine is receiving now that some of the reforms are even backtracking. So he took this quite a bold step of appointing me, because as you rightly said that we called it colorful, but of course I'm not for some Ukrainians and also in this region for some important foreign actors. I'm a controversial
let me jump in because I want to keep this as very much a quick fire Q&A. So we all know that there was a desire on the part of the president to have you installed as deputy premier. That couldn't happen because there were a lot of political interests that didn't want to see you take up that position. Strikes me that you are a deeply controversial figure in Ukraine, and that is going to make it very difficult for you to push through reforms which you've already indicated are going to be very difficult to achieve?
Well, yes and no, because on the one hand, you're true, but who objected against my wife's prime ministership? There's some part of Zelensky's faction, but they were in small minority, and there were very strongly pro-Russian groupings in Ukrainian parliament and pro-Russian channels in Ukrainian media space. First, second, in terms of controversy, I've just conducted a poll just a few weeks ago, and it said who would be the best Ukrainian prime minister in terms of crisis, and I was at the top of that poll. If you look at negatives, in terms of negatives, I saw just polls 2 days ago. I'm way below most of the Ukrainian politicians in terms of negatives. Of course, everyone has negatives, but I'm well below, I think 45%, which is kind of, if you compare with 75% of all the many others. So, for Ukrainian population, I'm not such a hostile figure. For vested interest and corrupt interest, and for Russian interest especially, it's obvious that they certainly are not willing to see me anywhere. So it's not about me, but it's about the fact that Zelensky thinks that, at least I'm capable, I have some experience of doing reforms, not only in Georgia, but also in Ukraine, actually. So he thought that it would be symbolic or even helpful to get not only me, but my team of very able Ukrainians. And we already are assembling this team. We are getting some of the best people. Polina, the drive on the right hand from me, she was head of one of the main engines behind the reform of Prosecutor General's office under Rybashapka, and she was one of the main persons in Nabu when it got formed. We have Maria Barabash here. We have a number of others who are prominent for doing things here. So we got quite some group here. We are working quite close with Andrei Fedorov.
Mikheil, I've talked to you a lot. I know you love to talk fast and you love to talk long, but I'm going to try.
I know like to interrupt. Yes, so go ahead.
Exactly. You got to give me a chance to talk too. So listen, when you took this job, how detailed a conversation did you have with President Zelensky about what you wanted to do and what your priorities were?
Yes, we are meeting with him on a regular basis. Actually, I used to meet him prior to taking this job on a regular basis before. On very short notice, whenever he would call, I would call. We would meet within maximum 1 day. And I have to say, he gave us three main priorities. What's really is important for him today. This is customs reform, because this is something where we can deliver on the spot and show a real difference. And actually, I almost achieved this in Odesa when we created open customs zone. At the last minute, it was a success story, cut it short. But we did it in Georgia, because in Georgia, we had the world's fastest and most transparent customs, according to the IFC and the World Bank. So that's the first priority. The second priority is that deregulation. He clearly understands that Ukraine is over-regulated, that there's excessive bureaucracy, and people that brought him to power absolutely hate it, and they want him to change it and to reverse everything that previous political elites have built, like this excessive post-Soviet regulations. And third thing he wants us to work on, and this is like our joint thing, and he has a very bold idea. He wants Kiev Financial Center put in existence. He's actually contemplating the idea to privatize and sell all the government quarter that is situated in the center of Kiev, to give it under, specifically with the goal of allocating it towards Kiev Financial Center, moving administrative center further from the center of the capital, but also having this idea that, that we should have British law or special arbitral clause there, special regulations to streamline lots of things. He clearly understands the need for streamlining and for getting rid of bottlenecks. That's why they put this council in place in the first place.
Right. The thing is, I remember you talking a great deal about your ambitious reform plans for Ukraine when you were in charge of the Odesa region and you were on my show. And the truth is, you didn't achieve what you wanted to achieve. You fell out with the president and you were, in essence, you were banished from the country. Why are we to believe this time is going to be any different?
Well, on Odesa, we achieved several things. First of all, we did the first service center for public services in Ukraine that became a role model for the entire Ukraine. And lots of public services got streamlined, that it was started, The second achievement, I believe what it was that we managed to keep Odesa customs as this unique example in all post-independence history of Ukraine. Odesa custom, which is usually the most traditional, had always been most traditionally corrupt custom, absolutely corruption-free, clean under Marushevska and with my help. And actually, this is a major achievement because what we had there is that still people remember that, and we did a number of things how to change it locally. That's second thing. And third thing, but not least, for the local inhabitants, we managed to build a road, Odesa-Renit road. This is 230 kilometers, connecting Odesa to the European Union border with to Romania. And that was something that the Odesa inhabitants have been dreaming of for 40, 50 years, but because of corruption, mismanagement, it had never been done in even Soviet times. No, these are three major achievements. Now,
hang on. Okay, so hang on. You've given me a list of what you say your major achievements, but the point is, have you not learned one basic thing? That is, Ukraine is so very different from Georgia, and you can point to the incredible economic success story that you were part of in Georgia in the early 2000s. But Ukraine is so fundamentally different. The scale of the economy is different. The degree of entrenched oligarch interest in Ukraine is different. The public mood is different because a lot of Ukrainians right now seem to be sick of the idea of reform and just want strong government. You've got so many problems in Ukraine that you didn't have in Georgia, and that frankly, there's no reason to believe you know how to solve.
Yeah, well, of course, I don't have magic wand. You are totally right. And the thing is that, there are certain things, yes and no. On the one hand, there are no copy paste. But if you look at what we applied successfully from Georgian experience to Ukraine, lots of Ukrainian reforms that were more or less had an impact on the population. For instance, like Ukrainian police reform. Still, most of the Ukrainians believe there is a huge improvement in terms of patrol police here. It's a big step forward ahead of before, after the road police they had here. It's total copy of the Georgian police reform. Well, it didn't produce exactly the same results as in Georgia. They are still not as good, but it's a Georgian thing that worked in Ukraine. Or, for instance, the electronic, the government procurement system, Prozoro. Lots of Georgian people were helping Max Fedorov, who was the head of that system, originally to create. Or National Anti-Corruption Bureau. Some of the things were written by Georgian specialists. Actually, one of my colleagues from Georgia, Gizo Blau, is heading investigation there. He's deputy head of that service. Prosecutor General's office, Surabadeshvili, former Prosecutor General of Georgia, was the main guy for Bashavka to do the reform, the Georgian style, the exams Georgian style. So some of the things that are deemed by Ukrainian population as to be a success story were just taken from Georgian role model and installed in Georgian, in Ukrainian thing. Now, look, there are also some Georgian vineyards in Ukraine that say, in one case, differently from when it's planted in Georgian soil. Georgian reforms don't exactly apply in Ukraine. That's absolutely correct. But some of the things apply because basically it was the same. To get rid of Soviet inertia, to get rid of the Soviet regulation, in transparency, entrenched interest of bureaucracy. With regard to oligarchs, you are totally right. Georgia never had, well, Georgia has Russian oligarchs running it now, but they never had entrenched, locally grown oligarchs. Now, in Ukraine, still oligarchs control more or less 20% of the economy. It is a problem. I'm fully aware of that, especially because of their control over media and.
Hang on. I want to stop you. Did you just say that oligarchs control virtually 100% of the Ukrainian economy?
20%.
Oh, sorry, I misheard you. I thought 100 was a bit dramatic.
No, not yet. Thanks God. But we still have 80%.
To be honest with you, 20% sounds very low to me. Let us be realistic. Given the nature
but they control in addition most of the media. And they used to control most of the parliament. I have to give Zelensky credit that still this parliament has the lowest ratio of oligarch-backed MPs if you compare it with all the parliaments since the oligarchs emerged. So he really did it. So that's a big step forward. Media control is still a huge problem. But overall, I mean, we still have to try. It doesn't mean that all the things I'm talking about, we shouldn't apply here.
No, I find what you're saying very, very interesting. But the bottom line is, in Georgia, you were the president and you could deliver. Now you are reliant on your relationship with Mr. Zelensky.
Absolutely.
And if we look at, so let's look at the recent record. You know, he creates a new government in March. He puts into place ministers who are younger, less experienced than.
Hello. We are stuck, I think, here.
Customs officers.
Yes.
So if you think about Zelensky's record, it doesn't inspire confidence that he's really serious about reform right now.
Yes, there are certain questions, obviously, because some of the people who had track record of being pro-reformist have been sidelined by the government. Unfortunately, that has been the mood of the Ukrainian population. You know that we had some economic problems starting in the fall. There were problems connected to the budget. There were problems connected to payment balances. There were problems. Also, we stuck with some legislation. Some things have been done, like land legislation is a major breakthrough, and that's something where Zelensky was absolutely strong, solid, and it was a revolutionary thing to push for the Ukrainian parliament. Now, with IMF programs, by the way, IMF was also quite instrumental in that. They helped us to push some of this legislation through. Labor code has been done by previous government, and now I have instruction from President Zelensky to push it through. You are absolutely right. It's his game now. It's not my game, and I'm not pretending to have my game. Everything we can suggest and propose can only be done with him, through him, thanks to him, and by convincing him. I have no illusions about. I'm just a trainer here, but maybe a playing trainer. But he's the one who will be scoring the goal. He's the attacker.
Given what we just discussed about him changing the personnel in government and getting rid of some people that actually looked like reformers, how confident are you that he is really going to back you?
Well, let's wait and see. So far, we've been getting backing on every point. For instance, like we have there is this thing on gambling law, which I'm a strong proponent of because we have a very huge illegal gambling industry here, which is not giving anything to the budget, and there's lots of shadowy things going on there. And some people push through in parliament very corrupt draft law. I came to Zelensky. I explained to him why it's corrupt, and within 2 minutes, he was calling everyone, demanding from everyone to change it. And since then, I mean, every time I do something on that law, he's very clearly against this vested interest once it was brought to his attention. Now, on customs, I explained to him the principal things we want to change on customs, and it's a revolutionary change for Ukrainian customs. Usually in the past, I tried to suggest the same to Poroshenko, and Poroshenko lost it outright. Zelensky says that he was very excited about it. He keeps calling me, saying, when are we going to push it through? When are we going to bring it to the meeting where we can confirm it? So that's a hopeful sign. I'm just judging by what my experience of interaction is.
Well, hang on.
Let's see.
Well, I'm going to give you a couple more questions, Mikheil, and then you'll be delighted to know that I'm going to actually bring in some of the questions that we've got from our audience around the world, because I'm delighted to say there's pretty much 200 people at the moment listening to this, and they're people who know Ukraine very well, so they'll probably have much better questions than me. But I want to know how long you're going to give this fascinating political cohabitation with Zelensky. You say that he's the guy and you're simply his trainer, his assistant, but how long are you going to give it before you make a judgment as to whether he's serious about your vision of fundamental reform?
I joked to some of his associates that just in case I was looking out of always look out of his office where is the nearest exit to the roof, right, and the escape route through the roof. But that's just maybe a joke. But the thing is,
given your career, maybe that's not a joke. Maybe that's serious.
Yes. Well, yes. I think I don't think it's I'm going to need it because there's a huge difference between him and Poroshenko. He might not fail to do something, but he will not do it deliberately. The other guy was doing it deliberately. He was knowing exactly what he was doing. So the thing is, Yeah, I think we have just very little time because look, we are walking out of COVID epidemic, and where we're going, Ukraine will have double-digit contraction, which means that within several months we'll have not only economic crisis, we'll have a budgetary crisis because Ukraine doesn't have reserves. Once we have budgetary crisis, there is a high eventuality of political crisis. So I regard the crisis as an opportunity to radical reform. Some people would say it's just end of everything. There's no use to do something. So that's not how I would look at the crisis. So I would like to convince Zelensky in this thing that this is an opportunity. Exactly because we have the crisis, we should move fast. Because Ukraine, how it was always, Ukraine could always sell grain, metal, steel, like other things. And so why would it bother to reform? Now, because this whole thing is we are running out of any reserves, and there's precarious situation in the world market. The only thing how we can change it to allow economy to rescue itself without major interference from the state. And for instance, today we had there is this thing, IMF will basically push through the tax legislation, but it's not ideally good, necessarily good. There are some very bad points there. And the thing is that Zelensky's idea, he asked us to reconsider it, to immediately submit changes because he says, look, we should allow the business to be self-reliant in independence. We should stop administrative intrusion. This was his instinct, not what I was suggesting to him. So there are major philosophic points where we don't fully intercede, and that gives me hope.
Okay. Mikheil, I've got loads more questions, but we've got plenty of time, so I'm going to weave in some of our audience questions alongside mine because there's some really interesting ones. We've talked, you and me, we've talked plenty about the respective experiences in Georgia and Ukraine. And here's an interesting question. It says, you are pursuing your political career in Ukraine right now, but you certainly haven't given up on Georgia either. And Georgia has got elections coming up quite soon. And are you going to be active in those elections in Georgia? Or can you tell the people of Ukraine that your only focus right now is Ukraine?
Well, physically, I don't really have time to take care of Georgian events. The Georgian politics is even more complicated than Ukraine. It takes lots of time. I'm totally confident that Georgia is going to have change for simple reasons. When I was president, Georgia's economy grew fourfold, 4 times. Since I was president, I had executive power for a little bit more than 8 years. We have the government in Georgia now for the last 8 years, which actually under it, not only economy didn't grow in percentage, but now with the latest event, it will contract for the 8 years. It will go down like -6 or 7%. It's not a nice situation, and Georgian people will respond. Also, lots of things that will stop there. So Georgian people will make their own decision about change. I don't think it needs any pushing from me, but obviously there are people who.
I know you well enough to feel that what you're telling me right now is that you see yourself as the long-term savior of Georgia. You're in Ukraine for a bit, but it sounds to me like you want to go home and save Georgia.
Wait a minute. I think when my experience in Georgia is that when Ukraine was in really bad shape, that's when we really lost it in Georgia. Once we got Yanukovych in Ukraine, we got so isolated from our natural habitat in the West that we stood no chance. So I regard my fight in Ukraine also as a fight for Georgia, geopolitically. If I went to Odesa because if Odesa had fallen back then, and it was, I remind you, it's very precarious time. When we arrived in Odesa, lots of people in Ukraine, highly placed, refused to take the position of governorship of Odesa because they would have explosion every day. There were separatist onslaughts every day. And when I went there, it was also, I went there for Georgia because if Odesa had fallen, if Ukraine had lost the south, we could have forgotten about Georgia's access to the civilized world. So this is, of course, everything I do here, it has something to do with Georgia, and that there is no secret about it. I say it openly. However, the thing is that if Ukraine reforms, if Ukraine really changes, then it reverses the entire logic of this region. Even Georgian reforms could influence Russian mindset. Can you imagine if Ukraine reforms really well? It's end of the Putin system. That's why Putin would do just anything not to allow Ukraine to have successful reform. For him, not the military confrontation is the main one. There, he can always have upper hand. But if there is a successful reform, he doesn't know what to do about it. That's how I see it.
All right. Yeah, well, we can talk more about Putin and Russia later, maybe, but Putin isn't the only obstacle to reform in Ukraine. I'm very mindful that you basically have a very poor relationship with the interior minister. I believe it's true to say he once tried to throw a glass of water into your face. He is a very powerful... Yeah, he's a very powerful man in Ukraine today. He's very close to Zelensky. Zelensky, we know, is also close to one of the most powerful oligarchs in Ukraine, Mr. Kolomoisky. Given all of that, how much leverage do you really have? You know, Zelensky has a lot of interests and allies that are not talking the same language as you.
Well, look, first of all, on oligarchs, if you look carefully, the anti-banking law was passed and President Zelensky was very adamant that it passed it. And obviously many people said that it was anti-Kolomoisky law, right? So, and Zelensky didn't have any scruples and reservations about it whatsoever. If you look at other oligarchs, you know that there is an ongoing battle about, for instance, green energy, where there are interests of other oligarchs as well. And Zelensky is very tough on that one, even if I think that, you know, there are foreign investors there and they have their own issues and quite legitimate ones. But because also some oligarchs were involved, I think that was Zelensky's more or less reaction to it. So Zelensky is naturally prone to resist this image that he's not an independent guy, he's somebody else's pawn. I think that's the worst insult you can give on him. He's on his own very ambitious person and man, if I understand anything. That's one thing. The other thing is with, you know, Avakov and Saakashvili. Look, I had not a personal conflict with Avakov. I had conflict with Popular Front, which was represented back then. Before the entire system, and this conflict was based on concrete things. When I was Odesa governor, I had we clearly saw that there were party interests of different political parties of Ukrainian coalition. We stayed at the prices in Odesa, and they were not necessarily you know, legitimate state interests. They were very often quite the opposite. So when I crashed with this interest, then I had problems with the government team, and Avakov was their frontman. Avakov was their speaker. I don't think I should permanently be like in revengeful mood towards, you know, one couple at the government meeting. I don't intercede directly with Avakov now. If I had been in the government, that would have been an entirely different story. Some people said that he also had something to do with blocking me the entering the government. I don't know all the details of this, but I'm not in the government. I'm where I am now. I'm doing what I'm doing. And if it somehow intercedes with Avakov and his office, then it will be an entirely different story. And if there is a clash or if there's pushback. So far, I don't see it and I don't have to worry about it. Otherwise, I'm not looking for conflict and for glass throwing into anyone. I think there are other ways to push through some of our things of the agenda. Until they start to throw glasses at me.
It's fair to say
glasses at me is something else.
It's fair to say that sometimes conflict finds you, even if you're not looking for it. So we're going to have to.
Well, if then I'll decide that we did something real, because if we have some achievement that people start throwing glasses at me, that maybe we are getting it. Maybe we are hitting really good nervous points. Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll look out for some glass throwing in Kiev. But let's talk about something else. Somebody has sent in a question about your attitude to the IMF, which I have to say I find a little bit puzzling. I think in the FT I saw you quoted as saying you want the IMF to double its assistance to Ukraine, but at other times you've said Ukraine shouldn't rely on the IMF, it shouldn't bow to the IMF, basically making it sound like you don't want the IMF dictating a reform program to Ukraine. So what is it? Do you want the IMF involved or not?
Well, my office is called the Office of Simple Solutions and Results, although this issue is not that simple, right? There are two aspects to it. In Georgia, after 1.5 years of my presidency, when I was initially elected, we kind of parted with the IMF, and this has happened because we already had sound finances. We no longer needed to require their assistance, and we had on our own delivered a reputation of being steady reformers, and that's why we didn't need, you know, trade jacket from IMF to limit certain things, right? In Ukraine, it's exactly the opposite at this stage. In Ukraine, the problem is that without IMF seal of approval, it will be much worse. Without IMF pushing through some of the reforms, it will be much worse. Again, it's a complex picture. Anti-banking law, great. Land law, great. Their participation was absolutely key and positive. Now, the tax code 1210 when they are giving much more rights to the tax office of the Ukraine, which was also one of IMF conditions, not ideal, not great at all, because there they didn't really look carefully what was in that law, and I think that's counterproductive also for reputation IMF here. But still, it's the seal of approval. It's a positive player in Ukraine, of course, strategically. Once Ukraine is so radically reformed, once it has sound, finances, we should be able to do without IMF. IMF's presence is sign of some kind of malaise, and we all know it. Now, the thing is, with the money amount they are giving us now will mostly cover payment for the percentage of that. Of course, it's not enough for anything. And I know that there are 100-something countries waiting for IMF help, and we are not the only ones. But we try to push it through. I think there are certain issues when Ukraine should bring it more to political level rather than just living at the level of discussion of the technocrats and bureaucrats. That's always the problem with the IMF. But overall, now the people, I would hate to be part of the people who say, let's get rid of IMF, because most of these people are on the dark side. And when they say, let's get rid of IMF, what they imply is that let's go to totally old ways of doing business without anybody else even asking questions. That's not my style at all.
Right. So to be clear then about this confusion about you and the IMF, you want the IMF to continue to be extremely actively involved in Ukraine. You want them to give more assistance, and you don't mind meeting their conditions.
Yeah, at this stage, it's basically meeting their conditions. In most cases, it's very helpful. Strategically, I want Ukraine to be a normal country with fast developing normal country, reform, sound finances, and then, of course, there will be no need at IMF. For us, now seal of approval is at this level, IMF. At later stage, seal of approval will be that there is no IMF, will be in such a good stage. But we have a long way to go there to get there.
You sure do. And you know, in a lot of your public statements over the last few weeks, you've talked about both deregulation and anti-corruption. Now, if Ukraine is to be serious about anti-corruption, one thing seems to me to be so important and over many years has been a big problem, and that is really establishing the rule of law, an independent judiciary, courts that the people can believe in as being honest and independent from top to bottom. Would you agree that's really important? And would you also agree that the firing of the prosecutor general does not bode well for Zelensky's commitment to really establishing judicial independence and integrity?
Well, Prosecutor General is my good friend, and I think he's a really good guy. He did amazing things at Prosecutor's Office. By the way, he was helped by Zurabadishvili, who was head of main advisor for the reforms and former Prosecutor General of Georgia. And he was the one who they introduced the system of examining, and basically they got rid of 70% through the testing of old prosecutors inside the Prosecutor General's office, and they were all bad guys, no doubt about it. Now, he was fired because there was an increasing public demand for real arrest. People were asking for blood, and Lubashenko didn't have time to deliver. So it was a success story cut short. I mean, Polina was working for them, and she knows more about that. But she, of course, they are all frustrated because lots of young bright reformers got there, and then basically they got sidelined. However, I spoke to new Prosecutor General, and she personally seems to be very committed to the reforms. We just had, for the first time in the history of Prosecutor's Office, her big meeting with basically a bunch of like dozens of Ukrainian businessmen from all different sectors. And she was very open, blunt, and they were quite critical, and she was okay with this. This had never happened before. Now we need to wait and see whether she delivers some concrete promises, which she did. But she clearly gave commitment. She will not bring back the old ones. She clearly gave commitment that also not only people who got out of the service because of testing, but also the illustrated one from Yanukovych folk are not coming back. So that's already good enough for me. Now, the rest needs to be seen. But with regards to other courts, well, Ukraine has an anti-corruption court, which is not corrupt, and it's already a big achievement. Ukraine has National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, which is definitely not corrupt, and that's already quite something, because if you talk to businessmen, you see that there's a clear progress with that institution. Ukraine has huge problems with corruption in SBU, because they are meddling into economy, the skilled service, with financial militia of the Ministry of Interior and some other people who are meddling into daily business activities. Now, There is a law on the Financial Investigation Bureau that should take care of this issue, and we hope to push this law quite soon. It will be a smaller bureau with much less rights, and will get rid of the economic functions of SBU. With regard, but there again, also Western pressure is extremely important. Exactly, the Western embassies that presented the idea that SBU should be deprived of economic function gives us an instrument here to deal with it, and I think it should be part of IMF conditionality for sure. Now, with regards to wider court system, we had a good experience with anti-corruption court of Ukraine because foreigners were taking active part and had decisive say in forming and appointing the judges. There was a big fight between Poroshenko and the international community back then, but the international community had upper hand, so Poroshenko had to agree, and then this trick worked. Now there is a fight about whether foreigners should have decisive say in disciplining the judges, firing them basically. And of course, there are always local entrenched interests that say we have sovereignty, we should do it ourselves. I'm fully backing the internationals to do it, and I think we can push it through. But we need a wider concept of much deeper reform. We need to reform constitutional court, which is always the last impediment and bastion against any good reforms. They're just stopping anything. The unfortunate problem is that constitutional court very often is backed by Venice Commission, which basically follows the blueprint that say you don't touch the judges, you only allow judges to discipline themselves. And in case of Ukraine, it's like mafia disciplining itself. That's all obvious, that it's not going to fly here. So we need a comprehensive concept with the help of at least part of international community, not following usual blueprints. We'll present it within next month and a half.
Okay. There's another strand to Ukraine's corruption story, and that is that for many years, too many officials, whether they be in the courts or the police or the customs service, have been paid very low salaries, which has in essence been an invitation for them to try and make money in other ways. We've got an interesting question here, which says, how can you explain that Zelensky now insists that the very low top salaries for state enterprise managers and other officials be maintained at levels which, you know, by any international relative comparison would be extremely low salary levels? Is that not, says the questioner, a pro-corruption policy? It is going to encourage more corruption.
It's a very, very legitimate question. The point here is that not everyone is getting low salaries, though. The people at National Anti-Corruption Bureau have quite good salaries. That's one. Also, in the Anti-Corruption Court, they have normal salaries. The supervisor boards of the most of state enterprises pay quite well. So it's not like all along the board. There are some people who are getting higher salaries. The thing is, yeah, there is a huge public pressure and skepticism about higher salaries because people are in the time of duress and economic pressure. This is, by the way, one of the reasons why many people decline ministerial positions when they are forming the new government. It's not only the thing that they we cannot find that Zelensky didn't want good people for the government. I know a number of very good reform-minded, good reputational people declined the position because of low salaries. The thing is, in Georgia, we increased the average salary of state officials 12-fold, but also because the budget of the country, the collection of the money, with the fact that we decreased, against the background that we decreased taxes by 65%, overall tax burden I'm talking about, we still had 12-fold increase of the budget, and we had 12-fold increase of the salaries. And I have to tell you, first we increased salaries and then budget increased. So there is a correlation. So we need to do this convincing here. It's, as you said, as I told you, there's a huge public pressure against it. Zelensky is very sensitive to this public pressure for obvious reasons, because he is not representative of the elite. He comes from this, with this popular support. He is where he is. But on the other hand, yes, we need to learn to a little bit push back and to push for our position. I don't think he believes that, I mean, he himself is for sure clean from corruption. I can guarantee, if I understand this 100%, because he is clean, because he is not a part of the shadow of things and his immediate surroundings. It's easy still to
Can I jump in?
John, can you hear me? It's Stephen here. I
hear you
dropped
fine.
out.
We seem to have lost Misha.
Well, I lost the feed for a moment, but I'm back now. Can you hear me, John?
I hear you perfectly.
But have we now lost Mikheil?
Seems so. I think we're trying to get him back.
Right. Well, everybody watching, just be patient with us because these glitches do happen. But we are trying to get our signal to Mr. Saakashvili back right now because we've got lots more questions for him. And we've got, let me look at we've got about 18 minutes left on our hour of discussion. So I'm hoping we'll get him back very soon. John, any idea whether we're getting any closer to getting him?
I think I see his office. I don't see him.
No, he seems to have disappeared. The seat that he was sitting at is now empty. Let us play for time for just a moment, John, and see what's happening. I'm sure somebody is calling his office to see where he's gone.
Well, there's someone. I wonder if they have a report for us.
Maria, is Mr. Saakashvili still there?
Steve, when I was a young man, I thought about becoming a sports announcer. I know one real talent is what you do, especially for baseball, to make idle talk when it's green.
It's one of the most important skills any broadcaster can have. If you're going to a live event, you've got to know how to fill the air, even when there's nothing happening.
That's true. Well, maybe we need to apply those tactics right now.
Well, I'm happy to. Look, here we go.
Dave,
we can hear you. We were disconnected for some reason.
Yeah, Mikheil, we were enjoying you so much. We were missing you already. But
yes.
let us resume our conversation. You remember we were discussing the importance of paying people a decent salary, and the fear that
we were disconnected at the moment when I said that Zelensky just backed one of the points of what you presented with customs reform, when customs should get part of basically all its service fees is levied exactly for paying the salaries, for giving customs officers much higher salaries, and he backed it. So he understands the complexity of the issue. We just need to go step by step, and ultimately he will be always on the right side.
Okay. I want to ask you just a personal question. You're a guy who some would describe as a larger-than-life character, and we know that President Zelensky is a guy who, frankly, doesn't like to be upstaged. You know, he likes to be the center of attention. He likes to do things his own way. He's appointed a lot of his own colleagues from his TV show into important positions. He doesn't really play the game of politics in a very collegiate way. Are you and he, on a personal basis, going to find it easy to work together? And to put it bluntly, are you prepared to play second fiddle to him?
The second, third, fifth, that's no problem. I'm not going to steal his show. He has achieved something which is quite remarkable. He really upstaged and removed the entire political class from the scene, and that's quite remarkable. I mean, I really admire that. Well, I spent already altogether more than 14 years of my life in Ukraine, so I'm heavily emotionally invested in Ukraine. I studied here. I went to the obligatory armed services here for 2 years. Obviously, I lived here for many years after that. So yeah, I have stake in Ukraine as well, but ultimately he's the one who is born in Ukraine, who is the ultimate hope of the Ukrainians now. And so we should, if he is successful, then we'll still have part of his fame and success. If he fails, I think we fail. All of us fail together with him. So we are in one boat right now. And once I jumped into this boat, then you obey the captain, or you try to make him successful. That's how we see it.
You know what? You just talked about, if he fails. You were quoted again in the Financial Times recently as saying, failure in this project, which you are now part of, could see the country cease to exist. What exactly do you mean by that? I mean,
look. I spent significant amount of my time, or until appointment here, I spent it in Odesa. I love Odesa. I see huge potential in Odesa, but I can see it firsthand how much the redentist separatist forces are strengthened there and in many other areas of Ukraine. And the thing is that if Ukraine doesn't move fast forward, we don't show the pace of change. If you go to all these areas, locally, not much has changed. There are local mafias running those cities. We decentralize Ukraine. On the one hand, it's a positive process, but it's not always as positive as it looks on the paper, because I've heard lots of international praise for decentralization. But in fact, local feudal bosses, local mafias have got all the budget, but there is no rule of law coming with it. So all the local courts, prosecutors, local security service, they are all under control of local criminal type of structures like Kernes or Trukhanov or others. And these criminals also criminalized people also happen to be very pro-Russian. So we are setting here a situation where Russia will benefit from an absence of progress through direct territorial gains, no doubt about it. And I think there are plans of Russia to break Ukraine into 5 parts, like Transcarpathia or Western Ukraine separate, or Central Ukraine, or Odessa separate, or the entire South and East separate. So there are all these plans. We hear them from different open sources. It's not that I'm talking about some intelligence information, but more than that, I see real threat of it if we see absence of progress. Here, failure of Zelensky would not mean that some other populists or some pro-Russians will take over centrally. They will take over locally, and instead of 1 Ukraine, we might get 5. And this was balkanization scenario of Ukraine, the ultimate nightmare scenario. Of course, none of us want to live, me for sure, to the moment when this is ever realized. So we'll do our best. Not even to get any chance to give any chance to our not well-wishers to be successful on that one.
But what do you think of the public mood in Ukraine right now? Because, I get the impression, looking at it from the outside, that there's a lot of weariness and even resentment about the West's efforts to sort of intervene and meddle and lecture Ukraine, and that Zelensky's tapping into a sort of a populist mood with a degree of authoritarianism, which is, in a sense, taking Ukraine in a different direction, less focused on meeting the sort of values of European democracy. For example, he doesn't seem that interested in building strong institutions. It's a very personal form of presidential leadership he's offering. Do you worry about that popular mood and about Zelensky taking Ukraine in a different direction?
Well, look, it's strange to hear that Zelensky is taking some authoritarian kind of style, because I think most of the people would accuse him exactly in the opposite, that he's not authoritarian enough. He's not taking it on himself too much. Look, I mean, you have this thing, like he says something about some local government issues, and then the mayor turns around and says, well, who the hell generally are you, Mr. President? And not even Mr. President, like calling him by name and saying you have nothing to do in our city. It's much worse than any U.S. governor would tell to Donald Trump. They are really rude to Zelensky. And, if he had been authoritarian, these guys who generally I believe that should have problems with the law and with law enforcement are not getting any problems. I wish they would have gotten any problems, not because they said something about Zelensky, but because they genuinely are not very clean. But the thing is that these not very clean people manage to openly lambast the president, that he doesn't do anything in response, right? So and nobody does. So that really shows you that there is a lack of authority rather than abundance of authority. That's one thing. The other thing is that yes, he has this very personal style, very personal style of communication with the people, and it works. So far, he has very high opinion poll ratings. Now, part that can be connected with COVID, and although we see Mr. Putin his popularity is falling here, but in mainstream is that if you have COVID virus, then people stick to the government and rally around the government or around the president. We'll see in the fall. The thing is that the main thing why he remains popular, I believe it is that people don't see that he got corrupt. People don't, and that's correct impression. He hasn't got corrupt. His surroundings has not gotten into any major scandals or problems. They are still keeping away from vested interests themselves. And the only criticism that can be, well, they are not really cracking down on this vested interest as hard as it should be. They are not really doing all the reforms across the board as people would expect. But again, this is like glass half empty or half full. But you cannot say that they are like themselves moving in the wrong direction. That's how I would say put it.
Okay, we've got time for a couple more questions. This one is a specific one about land reform. I imagine in your role on the Reform Council, you're going to think about that. The question is, how much does land reform actually help, given the degree to which it's already been watered down? It is unlikely to lead to an increase in FDI and foreign direct investment. Is that your assessment, that the land reform has been dangerously watered down?
With the land reform, I think what we are getting is that the main thing was to get through the principle. Principle was absolutely decisive, because the thing here was that, you know, for all these years they've been objecting. Who was objecting against this? Most of the people who are latifundis themselves, who have own land, who who steal from state lands all the time, and they were the ones who were saying, no, we don't need land property. We are fine with the old system. In fact, that we have exactly like gambling. We have shadow gambling, but they didn't want to legalize it. We have shadow land markets, and those who own the land, they were the ones who are against the ownership for the others. So I think what Zelensky did, which is very interesting and revolutionary, yes, it was watered down. Yes, many important things have been postponed, delayed, but they've been delayed for 4 years, 1 year, but they're still there. So the principle is there. The things that have been delayed, most of the things are in the law. Some of the things have been delayed for 1 or 4 years, for instance, like foreign ownership of land or some other things, or state lands, etc. But they're still there as a principle. So I think it was, if you ask me what is the single major achievement so far of the Zelensky presidency in terms of real legislative work, that's that piece of legislation that Ukrainians have been waiting for the last 30 years. Well, of course, many people objected, and that's also another test for Zelensky. Most of the people were against it because of the propaganda of oligarch-owned channels and some other issues. Zelensky did cut against prevailing public mood, and again, that's, you know, when there were some people around him that were telling him, look, let's wait with it, let's postpone it, and he understood that if he would have done it, it would have been end of his presidency. He would have stayed as president, but he would have lost the authority. And he clearly got it. And that's another sign of leadership and his capacity to lead.
All right. Listen, we've got a couple more questions from our audience, and I want to get through them, and we've only got a few minutes, so be brief. And these are questions which pick up on our conversation, but I think some people want to push you a bit harder. So Vera Gogokia wants me to ask this. If things change dramatically in Georgia after the elections, and if your party has a major success in those elections, will you, in all honesty, accept a top job back in Georgia and go back to Georgia?
Well, in all honesty, when it happens, and once it happens, then let's talk then. What's the hypothetical question now? It sounds to me like
you're very open to going back to Georgia. It's
half a year away from this now, but let's talk in half a year. I'm right now busy around the clock, 24/7 on this, what I'm doing here. And frankly, I speak to my friends in Georgia, but I'm not involved in day-to-day running of anything there. There are enough people to do it, and I think they're pretty happy with their independence.
All right. Here, this one goes back to our discussion about cleaning up the courts and establishing a truly credible judicial system. Theo Potonier wants me to ask, how is Ukraine going to replace thousands of corrupt judges and prosecutors with competent candidates all at once? Is there any way to fast track this radical reform of the legal system?
Well, I think it's totally doable because, like when I was president of Georgia, even before I became president of Georgia, in the 90s, when I was just a young parliamentarian, but was in charge of judicial reform there as head of parliamentary committee and member of High Council of Justice, we replaced almost 100% of the Georgian judges that it worked. and we had much less people to choose from than Ukraine has now. Ukraine has. I'm graduate of Ukraine law school. I know lots of very competent lawyers at every level in Ukraine that are honest, that are clean, and that would like to take over. The system does let them in, but if you open an opportunity, in Odesa, I replaced 100% of all the rayon heads, this district heads. Well, there were not many of them, 26, but still 100%. We replaced 100% of customs officer for new customs space, which were coming into existence. Replacing, and most of the cases when I didn't replace 100%, but replaced part of them, my regret was if I had replaced 80%, why we didn't replace the other remaining 20. All people, all so-called cadre in Soviet terms, they have no place in new system. That's for sure. That's my experience in Georgia, in Ukraine, anywhere else in post-Soviet space. I'm very radical on that one. Zelensky is part of that spirit. I mean, look at his parliamentarians. His main principle was not to get old guys. When he appoints new ones, he's very careful not to get. I'm almost the only exception that got any appointment from old systems. There are no people from old system. I'm still coming from because I'm so old that I've been in every system. I'm only the exception that was accepted. No one else in this new government or anywhere else from old systems. That's something to almost at least at this top level. So that's his principle, and that's a good principle.
All right. We're going to end with this one. It's a big picture thought from Basil Papan. He says, "Do you believe that on the one hand, Zelensky, with his seeking to appease Putin to end the war in the Donbass, while at the same time seeking Western support, financial assistance, EU and NATO relationships, is he basically trying to play both sides and sort of prostituting, that's Basil's word, not mine, prostituting Ukraine to both sides of the geopolitical divide?"
Look, I mean, first of all, I would never put it in those terms. And for me, the test case is my appointment. Come on, guys. I mean, like, for Putin, it was an absolute no-go. Like, you cannot appoint Saakashvili and want to have good relations with Putin. That's how Putin thinks. That's not, I think that's not a very helpful logic, but that's how Putin is. And when I was nominated as vice prime minister, you could have looked at Russian TV, and we had like, every day I had like 2 or 3 hours of primetime coverage. I was enjoying, I didn't watch it in any of it, but I had glimpse of the eye of it, and they went crazy, they went mad. And the fact that he did it, the fact that, on the gas issues, they were very tough and they collected payment from Russia on this arbitral reward. The fact that they're continuing to shoot on the front, unfortunately so, because Ukraine refused to do any major concessions that Russia was doing. If you look at the set of facts, Zelensky is still behaving himself like a totally independent president of independent country. On the other hand, our biggest help is also in this is, so to say, metaphorically Putin, because for Putin, any person that has title president of Ukraine is an anomaly. Look, he hated Yanukovych. It's not about Yushchenko only. He even hated Yanukovych. He hated Kuchma. Anybody who would be called president of Ukraine, because he believes Ukraine shouldn't exist in the first place, or if it exists, it should be 5 Ukraine, 6 Ukraine, not 1. So for himself, anybody who would be in the position of power here is anachronism, is basically not welcome. So from that standpoint, I don't see, it takes 2 to tango. How can they get a deal? I don't see it. I hope they could. I would be very happy if they would. But I don't see Putin signing any deal because, unfortunately, he sees any deal as a sign of weakness on his side. That's his logic. Very covert, but that's his logic.
Yeah, Mikheil, we have to wrap it up in just a moment. I'm just going to push you on one question from earlier, but you've got to give me just literally a 10-second answer. I think a lot of people will want to know how long you're prepared to give this project of yours, this reform project in Ukraine. If you are not seeing the results you want to see, will you still be in office in 1 year from now?
Of course not. I think maximum we should see results within next, up to 6 months. Let's put it this way, because And that's how I tell everyone, because what's the reform? Reform is not a specialty. It's not a profession. It's not like title. Especially people don't like the word reforms that in Ukraine, because they have been discredited so much that I like the word change. I'm more Obama-esque in that respect than reform. So the word reform is automatically, lots of words have been discredited in Ukraine. Young team have been discredited. Reformers have been discredited. So you try to maneuver to do this Byzantine world of terms here. So, but if reform is only successful, change is only successful, there is result. If there is result, there is no reform. Like in Odesa, there was no corruption. That was result in the customs. That's a concrete result. If we don't get results, we can get high grades from IMF, all the EBRD, international organization, even from very experienced journalists, but still Ukrainian people in the street would say, what the hell, what did you give to us? And then that's it. That's the end of the story. That's how I look at it. Ukraine has lots of groups of so-called self-proclaimed reformers or real reformers, people with good intentions, good people that get high grades in the West, but that are hated by their own population. Not because populations are so retrograde or ununderstanding, but because they haven't seen results. It's so simple. It's economy stupid, right? It's their livelihood stupid. That's it.
Exactly. So we will say the clock is ticking right now, and I hope we can have this conversation in 6 months or a year, and we'll assess just how it went and how you did. But right now, Mikheil, I'm going to thank you so much for joining me in this conversation for the Eurasia Center. I know that people around the world have been watching and listening and really appreciated it. It's been fascinating for me, and I hope I'll see you on the Hard Talk show before too long, and I wish you luck with your big task ahead.
I hope I can get on Hard Talk before, without getting again on the roof and having Hard Talk from the...
It's good to know that you know where the exits are in your building.
Exactly. I know it just in case, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, all right. Everybody who's been watching, thank you, Mikheil. Thank you to everybody who's been watching. Thanks to the Eurasia Center for putting this discussion on, and I will say goodbye to everybody around the world, and most particularly to Mikheil Saakashvili. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It's a great honor, and thanks to everyone. Thank you.